Okay, good morning everyone. Sorry about the delay getting in today. We've had this discussion yesterday about venues being open, but anyway, sorry. So today I'm going to move on with Conservation 102 now to talk about rivers, the things that rivers give us, and the way that rivers can be stressed. So again, we're talking about rivers, and in your minds now, after Dr. Van der Waal's lecture, you must consider that rivers arise in the mountains and they flow all the way down to the coast. And in addition to not only where they occur, so that rivers provide different things in different places along its length. But what's really important is that from your first semester, you guys were introduced to ecosystem services. And even in your exam, we asked you, can you discuss the differences between supporting services, provisioning services, regulating services, and cultural services? Do you remember that from your first term? So this is the ecosystem services wagon wheel, and what this does is it shows you as a synopsis, like a summary of what these different types of services are per category. Okay? And what's important here is that we're going to consider today these services that are provided by rivers and what are the threats that may affect these different types of services. So just to remind you, provisioning services are those things that you can get from the environment. Say those products, we call them natural products, those things that you can get from the environment. And they can include things from fish, wood, pollination, all of those things that you can harvest, honey, anything that you can harvest from the environment is a provisioning services, things that are given to us by the environment. Then regulating services include things like clean air, storage of carbon, water purification or assimilative capacity, control of flooding. You see, all of these are related to river ecosystems. And then cool temperatures, they control and they buffer the temperatures around us. Cultural services can be things like stewardship, aesthetic value, how pretty things look for you, recreation, education. Those are the cultural services. And then, of course, supporting services are things like habitat for ecosystems, habitat for biodiversity, photosynthesis, soil formation, food for the environment, productivity, and then clean water. So you need to get your head around these different types of services. What are the different categories? And in rivers, in particular, which we've discussed already, these are the important things that rivers do for us. They supply water, process and dilute waste, supply natural products, remember the provisioning services, sustain the plants, animals, and habitats that are important for nature conservation, help with flood control. They provide places for recreation and spiritual activities, as well as beautiful places that meet our need for beautiful places. Yeah, it's early today. All right, so you remember this map? So we spoke about the management of water resources. We're interested in the resources themselves, but we're also interested, and this is what this lecture is about, is that what are those services that are provided? Sorry, ma'am, whoever's last there, please take the stone out from by the door. Let it close. It's closed, eh? Is it closed? Is the door closed? All right. So this map is the map that we use to talk about, that's better. This is the map that we use to talk about how water resources are managed. So we consider these whole resources, on these large scales. And if you consider this on a large scale, we need to consider here as well, what do the rivers do for us that's important for us? So we're going to focus on these components. The importance of rivers that provide water to us. The importance and the role that rivers provide to us by diluting and processing our waste. We call that assimilative capacity. Natural products. What do we get from rivers? What do we derive from rivers? Where are they? What do they look like? Flood management. Why is that important for us? To make sure that we maintain and protect people from flood management or flooding. And then recreational activities. And in that category, we include religious and spiritual activities as well. Okay, so just to focus on the supply of water, do you guys really know that South Africa is an arid part of the world? Okay? But really, and guys, I want to show you this map that compares 1995 to 2025 is a prediction of water stress in the world. What parts of the world are going to go through water stress? And you can see that the highlight, the focus of the water stress parts of the world, is this part over here, which really is the Middle East, the Indian, Afghanistan, that desert area. I mean, that's a proper desert. If you look at Northern Africa as well with the Sahara, you can see the Sahara is also part of that water stress area. Why? Because it's one of the largest desert areas in the world. And second to that area where there's clear desertification, South Africa is listed as the second highest region where that will experience water stress. So it's quite serious, guys. From a global perspective, in an area, we are probably the second or third most vulnerable area to water stress because of how arid South Africa is. Okay, so you must think in your minds, what you've experienced, South Africa is beautiful, and you can see from the rainfall where we live, that we all live, again, this is another map of the rainfall distribution in Southern Africa, that we all live in that part of the country where we do get some rain. But we need to share the water that we get. So what do? We try and help the rest. You see, and that's a problem because we don't have a lot. So what do we need to do then? We need to start looking at collecting water from above us, from the Zambezi, from the Congo even, okay, and trying to bring some of that water to us. Okay, so we discussed that it's an arid country. Also, we have this big issue with the water being unequally distributed across the country. So if I asked you to discuss the factors that affect South Africa being an arid region and threatened by water stress, you would then say, first of all, we are an arid country. The amount of rainfall we receive is less. Let me just check quickly that this thing is recording. Is less than the potential for evaporation. Yeah. We also have very variable periods. So even South Africa and even this region goes through droughts. So you can imagine that we live in a part of the country that receives a lot more rainfall than everybody else. But we ourselves experience droughts. We're actually going through a drought now. There are water restrictions. Up to 60% of the water allocated to farmers is not available to use now. They can only use 40% of their allocations. We're under restrictions. And what do we do? What do we do to manage water stress in the country? Well, we build dams and we move water around, interbasin transfers. So we can do a lot ourselves to alleviate water stress, but that does have an impact. It affects the environment. So the building and construction of dams is problematic in many parts of the world, especially in our region because of how water scarce, the availability of water we have. And guys, on the east coast of South Africa, from the Limpopo River right down to the southern part of South Africa around the Eastern Cape, there are very few large rivers that are still connected, and the Crocodile River is one of them. So even today, if an eel swims into the Nkomati River at the ocean, it can swim all the way up and come all the way up to us here, go past the waterfall at the Botanical Gardens, go upstream as well. So these are one of the few connected rivers that are available to us. So what do we want to do because of water stress? We want to build new dams. So we're planning at least 2 new dams on the Crocodile River. Okay, well, something that we're only starting to look at now is this concept of ecological infrastructure. So although we build dams, we want to store water, so what do? We go build a dam. But what we've realized is that we could go and rehabilitate a wetland because the wetland retains water and releases it slowly. So if we wanted to also have the environment help us to store water and to protect the availability of water to supply to us gradually, we could also go and look at ecological infrastructure projects, and we could repair wetlands. Do you know that a wetland itself looks like a giant sponge? And the water that goes into the sponge fills the sponge up, and if the sponge was full, we could use it slowly. So it's like a natural dam. You understand that idea, that concept? But what we've been doing is we've been rather just remove the whole wetland and build a dam. Okay, that's not been such a good idea. But in some cases, we need it. Okay, now we're going to talk about the major users of water in South Africa from a volume perspective. And by far, the largest chunk of water that is being used in South Africa is by irrigation. Okay, irrigation, then domestic use versus basic human needs. We're going to talk about that. And then what are the next biggest uses? They're industry, mining, in combination. So you can see in terms of the water that we store in South Africa and we sell. So the government sells water to users. 60% of the water that is used in the country is used to produce food. Okay, compared to that, so it's 24% is used for formal urban domestic use, and only 5% is for rural use. Now, in your notes, guys, you'll notice in your notes that it says that the amount of water required for basic human needs is very small compared to the irrigation and other formal sectors. But the bulk delivery of water for urban communities has grown exceptionally. And this is recent information which shows that the amount of water delivered for urban community use, which is purchased, is massive. It's about 30%. Okay, so second to agriculture, the delivery of water for urban use is the second highest use, but it is not the basic human need. Okay, these are people who are using water for their gardens, their swimming pools. They use it for small factories inside of urban communities. There's lots of other things they use it for. They are not using it just for survival. But we're showing that as a sector, the water is being delivered to urban sectors and they are paying for the water, that they're the second highest user in the country, second behind irrigation. Then you get industries, mines, power generation. And what does afforestation mean? Eh? Plantations, eh? Plantations. And when you cut the plantations down, you are changing the environment, and the demand of water from those environments is quite high. So for forestry, there is 3% of the water is being lost just because of the different types of trees we're growing and how we manage that cycle of forestry. Okay. Okay, then we look at the ability of water to process and dilute wastes. So the first part of the services that we're interested in is that we supply water to people. It's very important, okay? We have to manage the supply. And this also brings in this concept of water stress. Water stress. Okay. The second one is to look at how rivers process and dilute waste. So not all rivers have the same quality. And I just wanted to bring you this picture because a lot of things are going on in a river that help us to contribute towards the processing of waste that we find in rivers. So the first thing is that there's a lot of biodegradation and transformation of your waste itself. So in the water, it's mixing with other chemicals in the water itself, and that fact alone, that there's lots of water, will transform your waste. Okay, not just the dilution issue, because there is dilution. So instead of having a very concentrated chemical that's in the environment, it's diluted and probably not as harmful as it would be. And one of the ways to think about this is that if you open your tap at home with chlorine in it, that's put in there to keep the water safe for you. If you put a fish into that water, the fish will die almost immediately. But if you take 1 bucket of water from the tap and 1 bucket of water from a river, and you mix the two together, the dilution drops the chlorine levels below the tolerance levels, and the fish survives. You see that? So just the fact that you've taken water from the environment, from a river that doesn't have chlorine in it, and you mix the two together, the fish is happy. The chlorine is still there, but the concentrations are lower. Okay, then you get this volatilization. So a lot of the substances in water are volatile. They actually move into gaseous form and they're released. That's why when you drive past a sewage works, it stinks. You can smell all of those chemicals that are being processed in that system. And that's what you're smelling, is because it's being released into the atmosphere, especially the nitrates and phosphates when it becomes nitrite. Okay, and then you also have these processes in the river as well, where a lot of this toxicants and water chemistry issues go into the sediments, and they're bound up in the sediments as well. Okay, so we know that water quality around the country is very different. It can be different naturally, like in some areas where you've got a lot of lime in your rocks, we get what we call hard water. Have you guys ever heard that before? Hard water and soft water. In some places, if you go to different places in the country, have you ever experienced that you try and wash yourself with soap? Some places the soap goes on quickly with bubbles, it's easy to wash, and in other places it becomes slimy and you cannot get it off easy. You have to rub. That's just because of the amount of carbonates in the water. That's all it is. So we refer to water that can come off quickly and it dissolves the salt or dissolves the soap from you quickly as soft water, and the water that you can't get off is hard water. You can also taste. We call it brackish. It tastes a little bit brackish. Okay. Brackish refers to salt, but we generally refer to hard water as being quite brackish as well. And you guys know that some rivers are clear, some rivers are turbid, and there are differences in the quality of different rivers depending on where you are. Okay, so there are differences in the quality of water naturally. But most importantly, very importantly, we also change the quality of waters ourselves. So human beings, we are the largest contributor to water quality problems in the world. Hey, we do it. And there are these three major groups of water quality drivers that we are influencing. And we put them in three categories. And the three categories are salts. We contribute to changing the loading of salts in the environment. Sewage and nutrients, we put those together. And then toxic substances. Okay, those three: salts, sewage and nutrients, and toxic substances. And we're going to go through those in a moment. And they also indirectly affect oxygen concentrations, the temperatures of the river, other system variables like alkalinity, pH, things like that are changed by the different substances that we release into the environment, and turbidity, the clarity of the water. And remember, the clarity of water changes. If it goes up, the potential for plant growth goes up. If it goes down, the potential for plant growth goes down. So you're actually driving and affecting the whole system just by changing some of these variables. All right. You've probably heard us talk a lot about the different type of drivers that affect ecosystems. We talk about flows, quantity of water and how it changes. We talk about quality, and that's what we're discussing this morning. And then we talk about habitat. How does the physical habitat characteristics change? And we have the ability to change all of those different categories. Okay, the fourth category is alien invasive species, usually disturbance to wildlife. Okay, so what do people do to environments? We can change the flows, we can change the quality, we can change the habitats, and we can also affect the alien invasive species. Okay, so here from a water quality perspective, we're interested in salts, sewage and nutrients and system variables, and they indirectly affect oxygen, temperatures, system variables, and turbidity. Okay, starting with salts. Let's talk about salts for a moment. Guys, a lot of farmland across the country has looked like that, and we're converting it. Look at, that's all salt pans now because of the way we are utilizing the environment and we're not protecting the environment. Okay, salts are a major issue across the world. I wanted to show you this picture. Does anybody know what this crop is? Hey? Tobacco. It's tobacco. Do you know that we used to grow, the majority of produce in this region was tobacco? Do you know that? One of the largest crops produced in the Nelspruit Mbombela district, the region, was tobacco. And today, we don't grow tobacco anymore. One of the reasons is because tobacco is very vulnerable to chlorides, salt. And we have a lot of chlorides in our water now. And because of the salt that comes from upstream, because of the way they're managing agriculture upstream, and there's a big pulp and paper mill upstream, we are now changing from tobacco because it's not growing so well anymore. You see, so even our own produce is shifting because the water quality is changing because of salts. And you think, what is the problem with salt? You know, you all have salt on your table, and you need salt to live. But we're talking about changing the natural levels of salt in the environment if it becomes too high or too low. Everybody knows what salts are. Do you have an idea in your mind what salts are? I don't want you to become chemists, but I do want you to have an idea that sodium and chloride is what is table salt. When you eat table salt, it's sodium and chloride. Do you know that? And then they put a little bit of iodine in it. Do you remember, I think one of the lectures we had before, we spoke about iodine. Iodine is very important for you. So where do you get your iodine from? You get it from your salt. People put the iodine in the salt for you so that you can use some of the salt and get some of the iodine. That's where it comes from. So salts are not only sodium and chloride, there are other salts like magnesium and calcium and sulfates and potassium, okay? Chlorides. Those are all different salts. We've got a group of salts called the toxicologically important major salts. You don't need to know which they are, what they are in particular, but you know that there's a category of salts. Okay, you need to, in your mind, have some idea of what are salts and what are toxicants. What are the actual poisonous toxic substances? You with me? You with me? Okay, great. So crop farmers pump water from rivers and spray it onto their land. So they're taking the water out and they're irrigating it onto the land. Now that water already contains a little bit of salt. And as it goes onto their land, what happens? You start to get evaporation and the plants use up the water. What's left? The salt. And if they do it again and again and again without managing their land, the salt concentration starts to grow. And eventually, after a long period of time, which is this picture above, the land becomes unusable because it's got too much salt. So if you don't build up your soil and you don't have anything to help you manage the salt concentrations in your water or in your soil, eventually your salt concentrations will get so high that you won't be able to grow crops. Okay, so rainfall washes salt away. So evaporation causes the salt concentrations to increase, and the rainfall washes the salts back into the river, and you have this cycle of salinization. It gets saltier and saltier and saltier. Okay, and if you don't have enough water running off your land, if you don't have enough water in the rivers to keep the salt moving, the region gets saltier and saltier and saltier. You understand? Because at the moment, why is the sea so salt? Where does all the nutrients, all the minerals come from that's in the sea? It comes from the land. It comes from the land because all of the water is being washed from the land. So sometimes a nice big flood will come, and heavy rains will wash over the landscape, and it'll wash a lot of the salts away, and they'll go into the rivers and they'll go down to the sea. But remember, when those salt concentrations are high in rivers, then you can have other problems. We'll talk about that in a moment. We also get major salt issues from mines, especially the coal mines. When you mine coal, a salt called sulfate is exposed. The sulfate ion is exposed. And when that sulfate binds up with other cations, you can get like calcium sulfate or magnesium sulfate. And when you get those salts that are forming after mining, they become very problematic in river ecosystems. And we have this big issue in South Africa called acid mine drainage. And this is a picture of acid mine drainage. That the rivers start to look like that. And the pH drops to 2 or 3. It becomes very acidic. It'll burn you if you go into that water. Okay. Wastewater treatment works, again from the urban communities, a lot of your chemicals go into the wastewater treatment works. A lot of those chemicals are salt and contaminated groundwater. In many parts of the world, the groundwater is kept low because the groundwater can sometimes be too salty. And when you start to irrigate and pump and start to link the groundwater together, the groundwater can rise and it becomes a problem. And what we found in Joburg now, in the whole of the Witwatersrand area, is because of the 100 years of mining, we have put too much salt into the groundwater. We have acid mine drainage issues, big issues with salt. Now we have to keep the salt, the water levels in the groundwater down. We have to pump the water out and treat it so we can keep the levels down, because if we start to get that water coming and interacting with the surface and coming out with springs, we're going to have huge pollution issues. It's going to destroy farmland. It's going to poison people. And that's here in Johannesburg. So we think we have over 200,000 years we will have to pump water out of the groundwater until the salt levels are all out, and then we can stop pumping. And where does it come from? Well, about 20, 30 years ago, for some reason, we thought that we've got all these mine dumps full of these salts and chemicals. We don't want them on the surface. Let's put them back into the holes. So they filled up all the holes with this polluted mine dump waste. And now the water has risen, and the water has taken all of those salts out of the waste. And we have a much bigger problem. So we've just shifted it into the groundwater, and now we've got to treat the groundwater at a massive expense. Okay. The consequences are change in the suitability of water and the cost of water. And again, to remove the salt is very, very, very costly. Do you remember Cape Town during their drought was considering taking water from the sea and taking the salt out of the water from the sea? But it was just too costly. No one can afford it. Can you imagine if it cost you, you pay 8 Rand for a Coke, but it would cost you 10 Rand a litre or 10 Rand for the same amount of water from your tap. And then the cost of the Coke wouldn't stay at 8 Rand, it would change to 50 Rand a bottle. because the cost of the water goes so high. Could you imagine? Could you imagine if the cost of water went up by 10 times for you, for all of us? Huh? Then we would only be using our basic human needs. We wouldn't be drinking anything else. You understand? That's how serious this is. And we're struggling to manage and afford things already. The country is under stress, you know. Okay, now we're going to talk about nutrients. So that was salt, hey? Salts. We're going to talk about nutrients. Nutrients comes from fertilizers, washing soaps, and what it does is all of these nutrients, we're talking about the nutrients in the water, okay? Mainly phosphates and nitrates. Those are the different types of nutrients that we measure in sewage, and phosphate and nitrates themselves are considered in the category of nutrients. What do? It is the building blocks for plants. So they allow plants to grow. So when you go to some places where there's sewage problems, there's lots of nutrients, what do you see? You see lots of green, leafy plants that grow because they are the ones that are benefiting from these nutrients. What happens in the river? If you get too many nutrients in the river, the algae starts to grow, bacteria and fungi starts to form and develop, and all of that starts to grow, and the whole condition of the system changes. So you can see here, you start off with a system that's in a good condition, and it slowly deteriorates. And as it deteriorates, you can see the condition of the system starts to worsen. Okay? And I just want to add here quickly, we give this 3 terms. There's 3 terms for these type of changing conditions. So an ecosystem that has very low salt loads is called oligotrophic. Oligotrophic just means that in terms of the nutrient load, it's very low. Oligotrophic. Then, as you start to move, as the nutrient levels start to increase, but you haven't affected things too much, you move to a mesotrophic. And then when it gets really bad and the nutrient levels are too high, and you can see that the plant characteristics and the habitat characteristics are completely transformed, there's too many nutrients, you get dominance of microcystis toxicity, bad plants, it's called eutrophic. Okay, so I've added there oligotrophic, mesotrophic, and eutrophic. Those are the 3 different levels of salt loading in your system. Oligotrophic, mesotrophic, eutrophic. Oligo is low, meso is middle, U is high. Okay. So in sewage, which is a common type of waste in rivers, we spoke about how many urban areas there are and how it enters the environment. Rural communities, peri-urban communities, and wastewater treatment works, that's where it comes from. Here, there is in italics, it says sewage is the easiest kind of pollution for a river to deal with because tiny organisms such as fungi and bacteria use the sewage. This doesn't mean that sewage or nutrient impacts don't have an impact on the environment. It just means compared to salts and toxicants, sewage is relatively easier to clean in the environment. It is easier to clean. But if you overload it, then we can't handle the system. Okay, so system like moving from oligotrophic to mesotrophic can handle a lot of waste. It can eat up a lot of the waste, the sewage and nutrient waste in your system. But if it's overloaded, it can't deal with that. Relative to salts, system cannot take the salts out. Okay, relative to toxicants like chemicals that are poisonous or cause toxicological harm, it cannot take those out either. However, consider nutrients. Okay, disease, and also you get major issues with diseases when you have sewage issues and nutrient contaminants in water. Major issues with diseases. And again, when we need to treat the water or keep people safe, it becomes very costly, very expensive. Okay, a few more minutes. Then we consider dilution. I think this is where we'll just do the rest of the water quality today. Just see, I think there's just 2 more. Yeah. So in terms of dilution, we have a lot of variability in rivers. Hey, we have high flows, we have low flows. We have wet phases when there's lots of rain. We have dry phases during the winters that we experience. We also get times when we have, so it's not only summer, winter, when the rainfall differs, but we also have drought periods and we have high rainfall periods. And especially when we have reduced flows, or when we have increased flows, that arrow just refers to when flows go up. Just put the icon again. When the flows go up, we also dilute or reduce the concentration. Two brackets like that together means concentration. So when the flows go up, the concentration of water of the chemicals in the water can go down. So even though the solution to pollution is not dilution, you see this statement here. Okay, dilution is not the solution to pollution. That's a cute little poem that we always try to teach people. Dilution is not the solution. It's because even though you're diluting the water, the concentrations go down, the actual amount of the chemical in your water stays the same. You understand that? So if someone like a wastewater treatment plant or a mine is releasing effluent into the environment, the amount of water in the environment, the amount of the chemical in the environment is still the same. It's just you diluting it by adding more water to it. So that chemical is still there. And sometimes some of these chemicals are very persistent. So we have a very rare type of chemical contaminant in KZN, which takes many, many, many years to break down. We call it a half-life. And the half-life of the year, the amount of time for the activity to reduce by half, is about 25 years. So all of that chemical that was released into the environment over the last 30 or 40 years is still in the environment and is still active today. You understand? That's a problem. So even though you've diluted it at some stage, it's still there. And when the flows go down, it becomes a problem again. That same chemical that was released into the environment 20, 30 years ago. Okay, and then there are major issues with disease. You know, when you get dilution, concentrations go up and go down, you can see the disease issues change. This is a picture from the hydrograph of the flow of water in the Nile River in Africa. And you can see they have a very clear October wet period where the flow levels go right up. And then during March and August, where my cursor is, you can see during that period the flows are very low. So you can see there's a dilution potential that during the high flow periods, everything gets better. A lot of the contaminants are diluted, but you also have some disease issues during that period. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But then during the base low flows, all the chemicals are concentrated. The chemical concentrations go up. And if you're a fish that lives in that river, you're going from a stressed out, contaminated period during the low flows, some recovery during high flows, and back to the stressed. And you're going backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. Okay, it's very stressful for biota and the environment. And in this case study, I included it here because during October, November, we similarly have a high risk of malaria. So when you have this water dilution, it's helping me with the chemicals, but what's happening is there's water everywhere, and the mosquitoes start to proliferate, and you get problems with malaria. So they have malaria and onchocerciasis, which is a type of fluke. It's a disease that also affects people related to flood water. Pools of water become isolated from the main river with flood recession, creating the ideal habitat for the Anopheles mosquito and the Bulinus snails, which causes bilharzia. It's a bilharzia vector. And other hemiptera, which is a type of invertebrates. And all of those snails, invertebrates, and mosquitoes, they are vectors for disease. And then because of that flow, when you start to have all these pools become stagnant and they're separated from the main channel, and the quality deteriorates, those animals proliferate, and we have outbreaks of malaria. Okay. Okay. It's quite serious. And then again, what happens? It costs us lots and lots and lots of money to treat. Okay, last slide for today. Toxic substances. Toxic substances come from mines, industries, agriculture. We consider things like metals, pesticides, even fluoride. Fluoride is very good for your teeth, but it's bad for your body. Okay, pesticides, organic contaminants, big problem related to macadamia nut farming, related to industries that release these contaminants that go into the environment and cause harm. So we have different categories: metals, pesticides, fluorides, for example. You know, ladies, there is a type of chemical called nanosilver, nanogold, these nanoparticles that are put into your shampoo. Why? Because it makes the shampoo feel nice for your fingers, but the metals are so small they go into your head and they can cause problems in your body. So because it feels good, everybody buys it, but they've got no idea that it's actually dangerous for you. Can you believe it, eh? Metal. You must look at your shampoo in particular and look for these silver ion, a label that even says, I'm giving you silver, and it's in the ionic nano form, and it's probably going to hurt you, but here it is. Do you understand? Thank goodness we don't use a lot of it. But it's a worrying. We don't know what the effect of these chemicals are in the environment yet. Okay, what about ARVs, antiretrovirals? You guys know we have this big problem in this country with HIV, and we give people antiretrovirals. Antiretrovirals are very persistent. So they end up back in the rivers, they end up back in the water treatment works, they end up back in your tap. So everybody in this country is exposed to antiretrovirals. Do you know that? All of you are drinking antiretrovirals. All of you. Why? Because it comes back from the water, because we can't take it out the water. So it's in the water. Some places are bad. Some places receive 30-40% of a normal dose of ARVs from drinking water. We have this thing called EDCs, endocrine disrupting compounds. Again, there are other issues that we're releasing estrogen. Ladies are taking the pill. Huh? Where does that pill end up? It ends up in your urine. It ends up in the toilet. It ends up in the river. It ends up in your tap. You understand? Lots of these contaminants. It can affect people or the environment, but the relationship between the environment and toxicants is very important. I said already in KZN, there's some rare toxicants called organic contaminants. They're called dioxins, which occur, they are released by some industries. They bind up in the sediments, and they sit in the sediments for many, many, many years. Who's heard of DDT? DDT is a chemical, it's a pesticide that we spray on houses to kill mosquitoes. Yeah, everybody knows. It is very dangerous. Most countries in the world have banned the use of DDT, banned it. Why? Because it affects breast milk, it affects your children, it gives them learning disabilities, it gives them autism, it gives them mutations, it gives them genetic problems, it gives them cancer. Yet we use it because we'd rather keep people alive. But you guys need to know this. Those contaminants are around us. They're around us every day. We are living in a world full of these stresses that our bodies have to try and manage. Okay. Who knows that I drink a lot of tea? I drink a lot of tea. Who here drinks a lot of coffee? Okay, your bodies are dealing with caffeine, stuff that your bodies have not been exposed to, that are foreign in the environment, and you're giving it all these different contaminants, these substances that you have to deal with. Smokers. Your bodies are dealing with the nicotine, they're dealing with the tar, they're dealing with the mercury, they're dealing with the uranium. Your bodies are dealing with all these things. And you think, oh, well, it's okay, it's just the mercury, the tar. It's not. You're getting ARVs from your water. You're getting EDCs from your water. When you're eating something, who eats tuna fish? Who eats tuna fish? You're getting mercury. Mercury contamination. If you ate tuna fish only all your life, you'll die of mercury poisoning. You understand? They're in the environment around us. This is a picture of a guy who was using mercury to try and get gold out of rocks. And eventually someone like that would have died of cancer in a few years to try and make some money. These are industries, and you can see these industries, they release a lot of contaminants, and we are there to manage them. We are there to go and see what is going on. What are you doing? I used to work, if you drive to Johannesburg on the N4, you drive past Sapi, Ngudwana. I worked in that river when I was at UJ between 2001 and 2008. Hey? Every year when I released my reports, they would panic. What am I going to reveal this year? What am I going to reveal this year? Salt loads, contaminants, dioxins. And we release them, we publish them. The world must see. The world must see. Okay, in that article that you guys reviewed on the fish of the Elands River, there was information there on the contaminants, water contaminants from the north. All right, but we all need the balance, hey? We all need the paper. Remember that. This is a map to show you. Last thing for today. that when you get contaminants in organisms, other organisms eat them. And because these things are picking up a few contaminants, and these things are eating them, can you see that as you start to eat more and more of them, because this thing is eating 50 mussels a day, this haddock is eating 5 salmon a day, and this swordfish is eating 5 haddock a day. You see? So the concentration of the contaminant grows. And when it gets to your tuna, up to 63% of the tuna can be contaminated with levels of mercury that are too high for a human to eat. You understand? It's called bioaccumulation or biomagnification. So this is a big problem with toxicants. So guys, part of what we do, we work with the government all the time to help them with what chemicals are in the environment. And we're even working with Russians and Indians and Chinese and Brazilians. BRICS. You know the BRICS banks? This university, we have a project with the BRICS bank, the BRICS countries. And we have different specialists from around the world coming here to help us manage our water quality. And we're working on contaminants like this. Okay, and we need students. We need you guys. If you guys are interested in geomorphs, if you're interested in water quality, if you're interested in fish, if you're interested in vertebrates, if you're interested in those things, the opportunity for you to continue with your studies is available here. Okay. Cool. That's it for today.